What if the most celebrated American muscle car ever built was actually hiding more than 24 layers of classified history beneath that chrome and steel? Welcome to Infology, where we dig past the showroom floor and into the buried chapters of automotive legend. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454. Not the horsepower stats you've already memorized. Not the quarter-mile bragging rights. We're talking about 20 jaw-dropping, mind-bending revelations that the history books never bothered to print. Stay locked in, because by the time we hit number 1, the way you think about this machine will never be the same. If classic American muscle makes your pulse jump, tap that like button and subscribe to Infology right now. Trust me, you're going to want to be here when we uncover what comes next. Number 20. The cars that officially never existed. Let's open with something that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but has the paperwork to back it up. Chevrolet's official ledger lists 12,827 SS 454 Chevelles produced in 1970. Clean number. Neat record. Case closed, or so they thought, when a wave of independent researchers started cross-referencing VIN registries in the 1990s. They stumbled onto something that made their heads spin. Documentation for roughly 1,500 additional vehicles, complete with build sheets, order forms, and factory stamps for cars that had never been given an official production number. Collectors nicknamed them phantom builds. Some theorists believe these were factory floor vehicles, quietly assembled for GM insiders and their preferred buyers. Others point to a more provocative angle, that Chevrolet deliberately trimmed its reported production totals to inflate the car's perceived rarity. And here's the kicker. Several of these phantom units have crossed the auction block over the decades, with paperwork that authenticates perfectly. Officially, they don't exist. But physically, they absolutely do. Number 19. The engine that broke the rules. Here's something GM probably wishes had stayed off the record. The legendary LS6, that thunderous 454 cubic inch power plant that became the heartbeat of an entire era, was never supposed to reach production. A corporate directive inside GM drew a hard line. No engine displacing over 400 cubic inches would be permitted inside an intermediate class vehicle. Safety concerns. Liability exposure. The feeling that too much power in civilian hands was a lawsuit waiting to happen. But the Chevelle engineering team had a different opinion. They quietly developed the engine in the background, ran clandestine performance tests, and when the moment arrived to present it to leadership, they framed it as an extremely limited specialist, only offering aimed at experienced performance drivers. The official policy against oversized engines remained on the books. Yet, 4,475 LS6 Chevelles rolled out of assembly plants. Funny, what happens when engineers believe in their work hard enough? Number 18. The color codes nobody can explain. Here's one for the detail-obsessed restorers in the room. Comb through GM's official 1970 color catalog, and you'll find a clean, orderly list of approved shades. But collectors have confirmed the existence of at least 7 colors that appeared on documented SS 454S colors that have no corresponding GM paint code anywhere. The most discussed example is a deep, moody purple that sits somewhere between official violet and near black. Enthusiasts call it midnight plum. Roughly 200 cars appear to have rolled out wearing it. GM maintains the shade was never produced. Yet, walk through any major Chevelle concours event, and you'll see them lined up, undeniably real, clearly factory applied. The working theory among historians is that select paint department employees were mixing custom formulas off the official schedule, reportedly in exchange for under-the-table payments. GM continues to deny it. The cars continue to exist. Number 17. The racing program that didn't officially happen. In 1970, General Motors maintained a strict corporate stance against organized motorsport involvement. No factory racing support. No performance-specific components. It was a public relations decision. As much as anything else, the company wanted to project an image of responsible corporate citizenship. Behind the scenes, if you spoke the right language to the right dealer, something else entirely was possible. Certain buyers were able to access undocumented performance components that arrived in plain, unmarked packaging with no part numbers and no paperwork. Cylinder heads that flowed substantially better than anything in the catalog. Camshaft profiles so aggressive they had no business operating on public roads. Rear axle ratios that made 0 sense for daily driving. Wink from the dealer. Handshake at the parts counter. Receipt? What receipt? Estimates suggest hundreds of these shadow performance packages were sold and installed. On Saturday nights at drag strips from coast to coast, these officially non-existent Chevelles were dismantling the competition. The program? Never happened. The wins? Very real. Number 16. What Canada got that America didn't. Most fans south of the border assumed that the best Chevelles were built on American soil. Here's a geography lesson that might sting a little. Canadian-assembled 1,970 Chevelles came equipped with options that were flatly unavailable to American buyers, and some of those options were remarkable. Standard Canadian packages included an enhanced cooling system with an integrated oil cooler, cold weather drivetrain, lubricants, and gear ratios optimized for low-temperature performance. But the most significant distinction was reserved for approximately 300 Canadian SS 454S, which received an experimental factory traction management system, a sophisticated limited slip arrangement with specialized clutch packs engineered to maintain grip on frozen surfaces. The system outperformed anything else GM produced at the time on ice. It was scheduled for full North American production in 1971. That launch never happened. Those 300 Canadian cars remain the only Chevelles ever fitted with factory traction technology. Number 15. The celebrity buyers who didn't want anyone to know. Hollywood had a problem with the Chevelle SS 454, not performance-wise, but socially. In the cultural ecosystem of 1,970 celebrity circles, muscle cars carried a working-class connotation. They were gritty, loud, unrefined, not the image A-listers were paying their publicists to project. And yet, they couldn't stay away. Confidential sales records recovered from a Beverly Hills Chevrolet franchise reveal a parade of A-list names none of them their own. One Academy Award-winning actor reportedly purchased 3 matching black SS 454S under his household employee's name. A prominent musician arranged for his to be delivered to a rented warehouse facility in Nevada, specifically to avoid press coverage. Many of these celebrity units received post-sale dealer modifications that went well beyond performance-reinforced glass, concealed storage compartments, even prototype communication systems that predated anything commercially available. These cars surface at auction occasionally today, almost always without a word about their original owners. The mystique stays buried. Number 14. The transmission that doesn't match the records. Pull up any authoritative source on 1,970 Chevelle drivetrain options, and you'll find a 4-speed manual gearbox or the turbo-hydromatic 400 automatic. That's the complete list. That's what GM says. So why do roughly 50 confirmed Chevelles carry a transmission code that decodes to a heavy-duty 3-speed automatic unit that was engineered exclusively for truck applications. Owners who discovered this anomaly initially assumed their documentation had been forged or mixed up. Then they compared notes with each other. Identical codes, identical shift behavior, and the production dates on all 50 cars clustered tightly within a narrow window in April 1970. The prevailing theory: GM used these Chevelles as covert real-world testbeds for a new automatic transmission design they were evaluating. Whatever they found in testing apparently didn't satisfy them because the unit never entered regular production. Those 50 cars still shift differently from every other Chevelle ever built. Number 13. The sabotage inside the assembly plant. This one crosses from strange into genuinely disturbing. Quality inspectors at the Arlington, Texas production facility began flagging an unusual pattern in late 1970. Approximately 1 out of every 100 SS 454 units coming through the line showed defects that were too consistent, too targeted to be accidental. Hardware installed with barely enough torque to hold position. Wiring assemblies with precise incisions at specific intervals. Brake system components with deliberate microdamage. The internal investigation revealed a coordinated act of sabotage by a group of workers with a shared grievance employees who had been passed over for advancement and were expressing their resentment in a very dangerous way. They weren't damaging randomly. They were targeting specific models destined for specific distribution territories. The workers were ultimately identified and removed, but not before an estimated 200 vehicles had already left the facility. GM conducted a quiet outreach campaign to locate them. Many had already been sold. Some may have experienced catastrophic failures attributed to other causes. A few might still be on the road. Number 12. The government fleet that doesn't appear in any ledger. In 1970, an order for exactly 37 Chevelle SS 454S was placed by entities connected to the United States federal government. No procurement records. No General Services Administration documentation. No paper trail of any recognizable kind, but the cars were built. Their VINs don't resolve through standard decoding systems. Their factory equipment included configurations unavailable through any civilian order channel dashboard-mounted switches capable of cutting all exterior lighting simultaneously, reinforced front-end structures engineered for barrier penetration, and engine calibrations that substantially exceeded published specifications. These weren't local law enforcement vehicles. Municipal agencies of the era didn't allocate budgets for SS 454 SE. The most credible accounts from individuals who claim direct knowledge suggest these cars served high-speed pursuit training programs or were used for rapid, discrete asset transport. Several have since appeared in private collections, always with the specialized equipment removed before sale. The sellers invariably reference government disposal auctions for which no official record can be found. Number 11. The secret dealer network building super-Chevelles. Somewhere around 20 Chevrolet franchise dealers across the country quietly formed what insiders called the Brotherhood of Speed, an informal network dedicated to taking factory SS 454S and transforming them into something the factory would never officially sanction. These dealers weren't installing bolt-on accessories. They were performing complete teardowns. Displacement pushed past 550 cubic inches using engines sourced through channels that shouldn't have existed. Suspension hardware borrowed from Corvette competition programs. Brake systems pulled from vehicles in a heavier weight class entirely. The rebuilt cars were then sold to a curated list of customers at substantial premiums, with a verbal understanding that the origin of the modifications would never be discussed and no warranty would ever be honored. GM was reportedly aware the network existed, but found itself unable to act without publicly acknowledging that it had been quietly supplying the parts that made it possible. Between 200 and 300 of these dealer-built monsters are estimated to have been completed. Finding one today is the muscle car equivalent of a field discovery. Number 10. The paint that changed color on its own. Stay with us here, because this one sounds impossible, but is thoroughly documented. In the middle of 1970, GM's Advanced Materials Research Division developed a temperature reactive automotive coating of paint that didn't just shift subtly in different lighting, but dramatically changed color as the vehicle's body panels absorbed heat. We're talking a full transition from near black to vivid red as the engine warmed and the sheet metal responded. 12 SS 454S were chosen as real-world test vehicles. They were distributed to GM engineering staff with detailed observation logs and strict instructions. The experiment collapsed spectacularly. The coating would cycle unpredictably. Cars would stabilize mid-transition, displaying two entirely different colors split across the body. Some reported color combinations that fell outside the paint's intended palette entirely. After 6 months, GM recalled all 12 cars for conventional refinishing. 10 were returned. 2 were not. Somewhere out there, 1,970 Chevelles exist that were once painted with technology that automotive science wouldn't revisit for another generation. Number 9. The sound that made test drivers physically uncomfortable. Every enthusiast knows the acoustic signature of a big block Chevy. That signature rumble is as identifiable as a think, but a subset of 1970 SS 454S produces something different, not just louder or raspier, but fundamentally unlike what the engine should generate. And it isn't the exhaust. Late in 1969, GM acoustic engineers were developing a resonator system designed to amplify and deepen the engine's tonal output to make an already intimidating car sound categorically more threatening. They fitted approximately 100 pre-production Chevelles with prototype resonator assemblies and sent them into testing. The results were unsettling. At specific RPM bands, the system generated low-frequency vibrations that test drivers reported feeling physically in their chests. Heart rhythm disruptions. Involuntary discomfort. GM terminated the program immediately. But those 100 test vehicles had already been absorbed into the regular production line. The resonators were never removed because the engineers couldn't locate all of them in time. Mechanics who encounter these cars today find nothing wrong because technically nothing is wrong. The resonators are doing precisely what they were designed to do. Number 8. The executive purge of October 1970. In a single day, during October 1970, 15 senior General Motors executives were terminated. The official explanation offered to the press was routine corporate restructuring. Insiders tell a different story. These executives had been exploiting their internal access to commission personal Chevelles, assembled from components that existed nowhere in any production catalog. Prototype power plants producing over 700 horsepower, suspension geometries borrowed from the Corvette Grand Sport racing effort, braking systems designed for race specification vehicles in a completely different weight class. They believed their positions insulated them from consequences. They were incorrect. When GM's board of directors received confirmation of what had been built, the response was absolute. The executives were dismissed. Their vehicles were reportedly scheduled for destruction. But at least 5 of these executive-built machines have since surfaced in private sales, always quiet, always conditional on discretion agreements. What remains in those garages represents what GM's engineers might have produced if corporate governance had simply looked the other way. Number 7. The insurance scheme that ran across 12 states. Insurance fraud isn't a modern invention. In 1970, a network of Chevrolet dealerships scattered across the country discovered that the Chevelle SS 454's combination of high demand, premium value, and immature VIN tracking infrastructure made it uniquely suited for a specific kind of profitable dishonesties. The formula was elegant in its simplicity. A dealer would file a theft report for a vehicle before it had been formally delivered to a buyer. The insurance payout would arrive. The car would subsequently surface at a dealership in another state, carrying a freshly minted VIN and a clean title with no traceable history. The system worked as long as demand stayed high and record-keeping stayed primitive, both of which were true in 1970. The scheme fractured when one vehicle accumulated 3 separate theft reports from 3 different states simultaneously. Insurance investigators pooled their data and identified a coordinated network spanning at least 50 dealerships across 12 states. The scandal was contained before it reached the press, but the vehicles it created are still out there, Chevelles that exist outside of any legitimate production record, sitting in private garages right now. Number 6. The space agency's test mules. Here's a sentence you probably never expected to read in a muscle car article. NASA purchased 1970 Chevelle S454 SE, not as executive transportation, as research hardware. The agency was deep in materials development for the space shuttle program and needed high-stress automotive test platforms. The Chevelles were fitted with ceramic braking rotors, body panel sections fabricated from early-generation carbon fiber, and exhaust systems constructed from titanium materials that wouldn't reach mainstream automotive production for decades. The cars were subjected to sustained high-speed runs, thermal cycling, and structural stress tests at NASA facilities. When the research program concluded, the vehicles were scheduled for disposal. NASA, operating at its characteristic level of administrative efficiency, simply parked them in a warehouse and let time pass. In the early 2000s, they moved through a government liquidation auction. The buyers received no information about what the cars had carried. Rolling pieces of space program engineering history are now presumably sitting in private collections, restored to stock appearance, with no indication that their components once contributed to space exploration. Number 5. The organized crime connection. By 1970, organized crime's transportation problem had a specific set of requirements. Luxury flagship vehicles, the traditional choice, had become too recognizable, too associated with a lifestyle that attracted attention. What was needed was a vehicle capable of sustained high-performance operation that appeared entirely ordinary from the outside. The Chevelle SS 454 fit the specification precisely. Through a network of compromised dealerships in New York, Chicago, and Detroit, criminal organizations ordered specially prepared units. These weren't just performance-tuned cars. They were purpose-built operational vehicles. Frame rails were modified to incorporate concealed storage compartments welded directly into the structure. Electrical systems were altered to give drivers independent control over brake light operation during nighttime movement. Select units received supplemental power delivery systems for emergency acceleration situations. Federal investigators were aware of the vehicles, but found the modifications too well concealed and the documentation too clean to build actionable cases. The full scope of the program only emerged years later through first-hand accounts from individuals who cooperated with prosecutors. Some of these vehicles have since found their way into museum collections. Others are owned by collectors who have no awareness of what their cars were once used to accomplish. Number 4. The recall that was prepared but never issued. In December of 1970, General Motors' internal quality engineering team confirmed a structural defect affecting approximately 800 SS 454 units produced during a specific 2-week window. The frame rail welds on these vehicles had been completed improperly under hard acceleration loads. Exactly the conditions these cars were built to encounter. The frames were capable of fracturing catastrophically. A recall was formally prepared. Dealer notifications were drafted. Communication templates for affected owners were written and ready. Then nothing happened. The recall was quietly shelved after an internal cost analysis concluded that managing individual liability claims as they arose would be financially preferable to a public acknowledgement of the defect. ME's calculation assumed that most of these vehicles would never experience the stress levels required to trigger failure. That assumption was largely correct, but not universally. Over the following decades, a number of Chevelles suffered sudden frame failures that owners and investigators attributed to age-related deterioration or aftermarket modifications. The actual cause was a decision made in a conference room in December 1970. Those 800 cars are still out there. Many have likely been structurally reinforced through restoration work without anyone knowing why the reinforcement was necessary. Number 3. The cars that were buried in the ground. This one sounds like something invented for a film plot. It isn't. In 1970, a senior GM executive became convinced that regulatory pressure and insurance industry lobbying would soon result in a federal prohibition on high-performance vehicles. His response was methodical and, depending on your perspective, either visionary or deeply eccentric. He commissioned 25 identical SS 454s, prepared them with industrial rust-inhibiting treatment, filled their tires with nitrogen rather than standard air, sealed them inside waterproof protective containers, and arranged for their burial at undisclosed locations distributed across the Midwest. The executive passed away in 1985, and with him went direct knowledge of the locations. What survived was a collection of cryptically worded notes left in secured deposit boxes and subtle annotations on vintage survey maps. To date, 7 of these buried Chevelles have been successfully recovered. Each emerged in genuinely pristine condition, 0 odometer reading, factory interior smell intact, original factory markings undisturbed. They have sold at auction for prices that reflect both their physical condition and the extraordinary nature of their story. 18 more remain below ground. Teams equipped with ground-penetrating radar and archival research tools continue to search. It's the most extreme version of a barn find ever documented. Number 2. The engines that predicted the future. In April 1970, a small team of GM powertrain engineers assembled 5 experimental engines, unlike anything that would reach a showroom for the next 2 decades. These weren't modified production units. They were prototype power plants, built around principles that the industry wouldn't adopt widely until the 1990s and beyond. Variable valve timing systems, direct fuel injection architectures, rudimentary electronic management units that monitored and adjusted engine output in real time. These concepts were installed inside SS 454 test vehicles and subjected to real-world evaluation. Dynamometer readings reportedly exceeded 600 horsepower, while fuel consumption figures bettered the standard production 454 by a meaningful margin. The technology was too expensive and too complex to bring to market in 1970. The program ended. The test cars were scheduled for destruction. At least 2 survived that order. They're in private ownership now, their owners possibly unaware that beneath their hoods sit engines that anticipated variable valve timing, direct injection, and electronic engine management by a generation. These aren't just muscle cars. They're moving proof that the future was already being built before most people knew what to ask for. Number 1. The car that ended an era. Late in 1970, General Motors assembled a single Chevelle SS 454 that was never intended for public display or civilian purchase. It was built to answer one internal question: how far could they actually go? Every performance upgrade in the catalog, every classified engineering modification from the programs we've described, every experimental component that hadn't survived the journey to production, all of it went into one car. The marketing team had already drafted the announcement. The press materials were written. This was going to be GM's definitive statement, proof that American engineering had no ceiling. Then the test sessions began. To 60 in under 3 seconds by the measurement tools of 1,970 quarter-mile times that remained unmatched in production vehicles for 30 years. A top speed that professional test drivers refused to approach twice. And 2 crashes, 2 incidents where drivers with documented high-performance experience simply could not maintain control of what GM had created. The conclusion reached in the executive conference room was not one of pride. It was one of recognition. The car was genuinely dangerous in a way that transcended acceptable risk. If it reached private ownership, people would die in measurable numbers, and the resulting legal exposure would threaten the company's existence. The decision was made. Not only would this vehicle never be produced, but the entire high-performance program would be wound down. The insurance industry had been circling. Federal safety regulators were sharpening their focus. This one car gave the people at the top of GM the justification, or perhaps the excuse they needed to let the muscle car era close. The Ultra Chevelle was reportedly destroyed, but the rumor has never fully died that it sits somewhere inside a GM storage facility, covered and waiting. The car so dangerous, it didn't just end its own production run, it ended an entire chapter of American automotive history. Some machines are too powerful for the world they were built in, and that's 20 revelations about the 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 that you won't find in any official brochure. From phantom production records to government fleet vehicles, from space program testbeds to a buried treasure hunt still actively ongoing, this car has always been more than the sum of its specifications. Which of these 20 revelations hit you hardest? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. The most dangerous car ever built wasn't dangerous because of its engine. It was dangerous because of what it proved. If you want more buried automotive history brought back into the light, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Wheel Infology. We're just getting started, and what's coming next will make today's list look like a warm-up. Keep your eyes open and your curiosity running, because the most interesting stories are always the ones they didn't want you to find. Thanks for watching.